Dear Governor, most regrettably, the recent quake has afflicted my humble abode in a most tragic manner, setting back the construction quite significantly. Alas, it did uncover some sort of underground vault beneath the backyard I was having excavated for conversion into a miniature orchard. I am having those quaint adventurers that I have had prior discussions with search that vault for anything that could be suitably fancy. Perhaps they might find something suitable for my fireplace. Yours sincerely, Marcus Duquesne. G'day mates, my name is Mordecai. Dungeon Jam is an event that's being hosted by Mystic Arts and Nagobi, where a whole bundle of creators create a dungeon each for the broader community to enjoy playing with their respective groups. This year, the theme is a 5-room dungeon, and I am taking an old dungeon I once made and upgrading it into a 5-room dungeon. The 5-room dungeon isn't so much a dungeon with 5 rooms, it's a design philosophy for creating tightly focused and somewhat short yet punchy dungeons. To keep it brief, the paradigm has a starting scene, 3 main scenes in the form of a dedicated role-playing, combat and skill scene, then finishing with a finale. The starting scene consists of an incident, something to draw the players in, which can include some form of challenge, but doesn't have to per se. As part of the design, both the starting scene and the finale can include a combat encounter, a skill challenge, or some form of roleplay. Since the 5-room dungeon is more of a set of guidelines rather than something set in stone, you can ignore one of those 3 main scenes and still have your dungeon follow those guidelines. The original dungeon that I had designed I had called the Water Clock Vault. It was this large and complex labyrinthine challenge, being primarily used as a form of competitive entertainment for a Colosseum-esque challenge, with multiple adventuring parties being pitted in their own copy of an identical water clock vault. The idea behind it was that the teams would have a limited amount of time in which to explore this sprawling dungeon, acquiring as much loot as possible to outperform fellow adventuring parties, whilst trying to solve multiple puzzles and resolving combat across a somewhat large complex of rooms and mazes. In other words, it was both big and cumbersome enough that it could easily run multiple sessions on accident and had multiples of several of the 5-room dungeon main scenes. So I took that old dungeon and scaled it down, tightened its focus, and reformatted it into the version that I am going to be presenting. Since the original dungeon was setting agnostic, I don't have to make many modifications with regards to that, outside of the inciting incident. The party is no longer a group of entertainers in a competition per se. Our inciting incident scene starts off with the adventuring party visiting Marcus Duquesne, a pompously posh yet polite noble. Whilst they're discussing something important to the overarching plot of the campaign, there's a miniature earthquake which occurs when the excavators in the backyard start digging up what they assume is some sort of underground bunker. Once his excavators have finished their report, our noble then asks the visiting adventuring party to clear out the vault in exchange for a large sum of gold, something that Marcus has in abundance for some mysterious reason. Marcus is however prepared to offer extra if the party does find something that would make a good decorative piece for his future fireplace. For the roleplay scene, the party can optionally talk to several of the excavators outside of the mysterious dungeon that has been uncovered by the quake. Talking to them could reveal information that could assist with the exploration. One of the excavators is seriously spooked, and a successful persuasion check will get them to reveal that when they took a brief look inside the chamber, they swear that the walls were moving in places, and that they had a feeling as though they were being watched by something. The rest of the excavators will attest that the chamber itself is strangely cold. The water clock vault consists of a total of 3 interconnected floors within a wide central chamber. Our party emerges in the top floor of the chamber, down here in this bottom area with a passageway that leads off of the map. Along with a central dais rising in the middle overlooking the majority of the chamber, there is a pair of water channels flowing from behind the walls, spilling over and down to the bottom floor. The middle floor has a myriad of murals depicting the constellations of the night sky as seen from different angles along the outer rim of the chamber, and has staircases connecting it to the top floor and a section where the party can swim into the flooded bottom floor. The walls are also lined with several large crystals that provide ambient light. These crystals are cold to the touch, and seem to be consistent with what one would expect out of ice. However, the party can, with a successful perception or investigation check, realise that these crystals seem to be strangely artificial, like having ice in hot weather where the ice doesn't seem to be melting despite the hot weather. The chamber is ambiently cold, but not to the degree where the party will need cold weather gear to survive. Searching the top floor reveals this door up here, which is locked with what looks to be an elaborate keyhole. On the door itself is a depiction of the water clock the vault is protecting, where the water clock itself in the depiction is surrounded on all sides by beetles and ice. This is our skills-based scene, exploring and mapping out the dungeon in search of the key, as these 3 floors are the entire dungeon. So, where is the key? The key itself is actually hiding at the bottom of the water pit on the bottom floor. The challenge is to somehow retrieve it. There are 2 immediate solutions that I can think of, but these aren't necessarily the only solutions. The first would be to swim down and dive to retrieve the key, which would require a set of constitution checks as the water is bitter cold. The second solution involves using either a fishing rod or something akin to that, which would then involve a strength or dexterity check to succeed. That said, whilst most solutions would involve a check, don't be afraid to reward players with an automatic success if they come up with something clever. However they retrieve the key from the water pit, this will trigger the combat scene shortly after the key has left the water. The chamber's temperature drops, as the water within starts to freeze over, and those suspicious crystals on the wall begin to move. Time to roll for initiative. The 4 enemies emerging from the walls are ice beetle sentinels, medium-sized constructs made entirely out of ice, giving off an ambient light. Their bodies consist entirely of this luminescent ice, morphed into the shape of an oversized, beetle-esque shape. They attack with a chilling, crushing bite up close, but aren't afraid to cast Ray of Frost on distant targets. They can also decide to crystallize as an action, which boosts their armor class by a significant amount until the start of the next turn, but this can't be done on consecutive turns. They also suffer no penalty from walking on icy, difficult terrain, as they skate across the surface of the frozen water pit with ease. They are, however, vulnerable to bludgeoning, fire, and thunder damage. Following this combat encounter, the party are free to use the key on the sealed door on the top floor, unlocking the vault proper, and revealing that the water clock depicted in the murals is stuck inside a very large ice cube. And then the ice cube starts to float as the ice lights up brightly, and the chamber's ambient temperature plummets. The finale scene for the dungeon is a boss fight against the water clock golem. This floating, bulky, luminescent ice cube, accompanied by several ice fragments resembling hands, powered by the mystical magic of the water clock in a last-ditch effort to not be claimed as a prize by the party. For this grand finale of the dungeon, I'm taking some inspiration from the legend himself, Matthew Colville, and I'm giving the water clock golem a set of villain actions. These work quite differently from legendary actions, but have a similar design principle, giving the villain a potential free action at the end of a player's turn. However, these villain actions can only be used once, similar to how a reaction is undertaken. Moreover, the villain actions are sequential, and thus it has to use them in order. The golem's primary means of attack is a flexible multi-attack, with which it can attack twice by slamming with either its 2 hand-like ice fragment clusters, or by switching one of these attacks for a Ray of Frost. It cannot replace both attacks with this cantrip, and whilst it does have 60 feet of flying speed, it must end its turn whilst on the ground. It cannot hover in the air. However, the rechargeable action it can take is to slam its way past multiple characters in a straight line, forcing a strength saving throw to avoid being knocked prone and to half the damage taken on a success. The 3 villain actions the Water Clock Golem has, in the order that it uses them, are Global Freezing, Conjure Vanguard, and Bolster. Global Freezing covers the entire chamber in icy, difficult terrain, and deals 2d4 cold damage to the entire party, unless they pass a Constitution saving throw, in which case they take no damage. A quirk of this difficult terrain is that dealing fire or thunder damage to any character or creature occupying a section of the icy difficult terrain removes that terrain for the remainder of the fight. Everywhere that is, except for the frozen over water pit and the frozen waterfalls from the top floor. The second villain action, Conjure Vanguard, is where the golem coalesces some of the icy difficult terrain in the chamber into Ice Beetle Vanguards. In function, these Ice Beetles are similar to the Sentinels fought earlier, with the difference being that these Vanguards have less HP and a lower AC. These Vanguards also cannot crystallize, but can instead attempt to grapple player characters with their crushing bite attack. These hostiles are largely meant to soak up damage away from the golem and to lock down problems as the golem sees fit. The last villain action is about putting up one final gambit for the golem to survive. Bolster applies a tiny permanent boost to the golem's AC by 1, and will give it 15 temporary hit points that last until the start of its next turn. However, if the golem loses those temporary hit points through damage, it becomes stunned until the end of that turn instead of getting a regular turn. Upon the Water Clock golem's defeat, it melts, and the chamber returns to a more normal temperature for the region of the world where the vault is located. The icy difficult terrain also begins to melt away, allowing the party to retrieve the Water Clock and report to Marcus that the chamber has been cleared out. And if the party decides to give Marcus the Water Clock, he will comment that it makes a suitable piece to hang above his fireplace. If the party keeps the Water Clock instead, identifying it reveals that it accurately tells the exact time of day at any time, and that it can be repaired to allow an attuned holder to conjure an Ice Beetle Sentinel of their own, in an adjacent square as an action once per day. That wraps up the 5-room dungeon version of the Water Clock Vault. I have to give a huge shout out to both Mystic Arts and Nigobi for hosting the event. I had quite a lot of fun sprucing up this old dungeon of mine. And I also have to give thanks to my audience for watching this video. Please check out the other dungeons that have been made for Dungeon Jam this year. I have included a link to the playlist as well as the Google Drive folder where you can download this dungeon as a PDF and the resources needed to host this on a virtual tabletop if you so choose, down in the description below. Again, thanks for watching, and I shall see you all next time.